Is a 25-foot trailer really the cutoff for staying in a national park? Let's look at it. We're traveling the country in a 27, really 28-foot Flying Cloud. When we decided to upgrade from our 16-foot base camp to a larger Airstream, one of the considerations that we had to take into account was where we would be able to camp. When we bought it, we knew we were going to be in it for extended periods of time. And we also knew that one of our main kind of goals was to travel and see national parks and different state parks. So when we bought it, a big concern for us was where in the national park system were we gonna be able to camp? In all of our research, as we read through it, so much of the research said if it was over 25 feet, you were gonna have a problem getting into national parks. Well, the 25-foot didn't work for us, and we made the decision just to go with the 27-foot, which is, again, really 28 feet. But I wanted to go through, I've done a bunch of research, and really there's not that many limitations to our trailer versus a 25 when you look at national parks. So what does our travel look like? Well, we stay at a lot of state parks. We stay at a lot of Corps of Engineers sites, which also happen to be state parks a lot of times. And we have stayed inside national parks. But some of the things that we've seen recently are, it's almost easier to stay outside of a national park, like just outside of a national park and drive in, than it is to stay in the national park. So for instance, recently we were in Death Valley, and to stay in Death Valley, I think was $40 a night. And to stay just outside of Death Valley, about a 20-mile drive, was $40 a night. But the big difference was inside the park was no hookups, no water, nothing. And outside the park, we had full hookups. So for the same price and a 20-mile drive, it was almost easier to stay outside the park. What I'm looking at today is whether you're able to stay in a national park or not. At the time when we were reading the research, one of the things that came up was that if you were over 27 foot, you could not stay in a national park or severely limited. And at the time, we were traveling with my brother pretty frequently, and he was in a 30-foot, and we had never had a problem. The two that come to mind are, we stayed at Grand Teton National Park, and we also stayed at Rocky Mountain National Park, and a 30-foot was just fine there. So we just made the decision that we were going to go forward with the 27-foot, and we were going to be in good shape. Now, 2 years after we bought our 27-foot trailer, I've done the research on recreation.gov, and I've looked at all of the national parks. And I'm here to share that the 27-foot really isn't that big a deal when it comes to staying inside a national park. So one thing to keep in mind is that there are some campgrounds in national parks that don't have any RV camping at all. And that's part of the data. The first part of the data is RVs up to about 12 feet in length. And that is essentially no restriction. There's a few that are, like I said, tent only, but generally you're not going to run into any problems with a 12-foot trailer. So after 12 feet, I went up to 19 foot. And if you look at 19 foot, 98% of national park campsites will fit at least one 19-foot trailer. So that's another thing that I should mention here is this doesn't say that every spot will accommodate these sizes. It says there's at least one spot that will accommodate these sizes. And so I've kind of broken it into different lengths here, but generally, if you're in a 19-foot trailer, you are going to have no problem finding a spot in a national park, assuming they're available. Next up, I went from 19 feet to 25 feet, and at 25 feet, you are able to camp in at least 93% of national park campgrounds. So, like, to put that in perspective, like, that's a lot of campgrounds that you have access to at 25 feet, and really just restricts you to a couple of places that you're not able to go. The one that matters to us is the next group, which is up to 29 feet. So up to 29 feet in length, your RV being 29 feet in length, ours is 28 feet. Up to 29 feet, you still have access to 84% of campgrounds within national parks. And I am going to reiterate here that this doesn't mean every site can accommodate this, but it does mean that there's at least one or a few sites at the campground that can accommodate a 29-foot trailer. So I might be limited by which spaces I can use, but I can still use the spaces there. With 63 national parks, that means that basically 52 parks in the system we can stay at with this trailer. It doesn't mean that all the sites are big enough for this trailer, but there are at least some sites available for this size trailer. Once you get past 29 feet, really it's not even that steep of a decline. At 32 feet, it goes down to 81% of parks, 35 feet, 73% of parks, 37 feet, 60% of parks, 40 feet, 53% of parks, and the really bad one is if you exceed 40 feet, you essentially are down to 7% of parks, which basically that means that there's 5 parks that are available to you. Generally speaking, 27 feet versus 25, there isn't that big of difference. There's a 9% difference between how many national parks you can stay in, but it's not like you go from you can stay in all national parks to you can stay in no national parks. And that was our understanding of it when we were going through the buying process. We were really afraid that we were not going to be able to stay in any national park because we were in a 27 foot. So ultimately, this is a far cry from 25 feet is the limit for national parks. And I'll put a disclaimer in here again, it does not mean that every site in every national park campground will accommodate a 27-foot trailer. It just means that there is availability for a 27-foot trailer within the parks. All right, so I picked a couple of parks just to talk about specifically, and the first one is Acadia National Park. And so at the Blackwoods Campground, 35-foot combined length is kind of the max there. And we're over 35 feet, but most of the time when they go to combined length, you can park kind of at an angle or sideways or things like that. That'll stop that from being an issue. So really you have no problem at that campground. Seawall Campground, 35 feet. So again, Acadia National Park, no issues. If you're looking for a spot, they're available. You just have to find the right one. Arches National Park. So Arches National Park is another great example where we chose to stay outside of the national park and drive in. We stayed at Dead Horse Point State Park, which was, by the way, incredible. We have a video on it, but Dead Horse Point State Park was a 30-minute drive to Arches and a 15-minute drive to Canyonlands. And it really provided us what we wanted. So there, at the Devil's Campground, 25% of spots will accommodate over 25 feet. 25% of spots will accommodate over 30 feet. And they have 25% of the spots that'll accommodate over 40 feet. So Arches is not a problem. There's a couple of other places there, but again, you can hear from that one campground, you're really not gonna have a problem with the length. It's more about the availability of spots. At Denali National Park, you can stay with a trailer up to 40 feet long as you pay for a premium spot. Regular spots are 30 feet. So again, I can fit in a regular spot. I can get the 40-foot spot if I feel like it's absolutely necessary. That's at the Riley Creek Campground. So another park where there's more campgrounds and there are other options, but just that one campground, just by itself, is completely taken care of. Moving on to Joshua Tree National Park. We just were at Joshua Tree National Park, and I will say at the Black Rock Campground, there were very few spots that would be able to take a 27-foot trailer. Not zero, but of the whole campground, there was probably 25% of them that could handle our trailer. Generally speaking, half of them will accommodate up to 25 feet and half will accommodate up to 35 feet. The spot we stayed in was really long. You could probably put a 50-foot trailer in that spot. However, it was so uneven, there were only a few spots where we were able to get relatively level with our trailer. Other than that, at Joshua Tree, there's a couple of other campgrounds, but 25 feet is about the max in the other campgrounds. I will say Black Rock Campground was perfect. There were great hiking trails right off the campground, and you were close to town, all that kind of stuff. It was a great place to be. That brings me to Zion National Park. So I'm trying to pick some popular ones here. Zion National Park, 19 feet is the limit. And so that's one where, hey, and if you're over 19 feet, you're not gonna stay in the park. Like I said earlier, our secret to national parks is we don't necessarily have to stay inside the park. We find these great options outside the park that allow us for either a better stay, like more comfortable stay, or a stay that allows us to do more things within reasonable distances. So I talked about Death Valley. We stayed at a casino. It was on the Nevada side. So number one bonus, I could buy diesel in Nevada at Nevada prices and not have to pay the California prices. When we were in the park, diesel was nearly $8. And again, we also got full hookups at this site for the same price as dry camping within the park. The other thing is, don't feel like you're limited to just KOAs or Jellystone or these big resort type parks that tend to be more expensive. There's a lot of state parks, there's a lot of privately owned parks that are in a close vicinity to national parks, and you're able to use them. Besides length, the other things to think about are, like, if you have slides. When we were at Grand Teton National Park, camping inside the park, our spot would have been a challenge to have any slide outs. We had trees on both sides of us and really just within a few feet. So that could be another limiting factor. We're in an Airstream, we don't have slides, so that's not something that comes up for us. While I can't research every state park just because there are so many, I can tell you that we've stayed in Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Nevada, Illinois, and we're currently in Arizona, and we have never had a problem at a state park. Not only have we never had a problem, but we've also never been the largest RV within any of those parks. We tend to think of our RV as being large because we move from a 16-foot to a 28-foot. But generally, when we're in a park, we tend to be on the smaller side. As I say that, there's a casita over there and there's a casita right here, which are much smaller than we are. I hope that the information I've given here has helped you understand a little bit more about what availability there is for staying in national parks. More than anything, what I hope it does is kind of dispel this myth that after you've gone over 25 feet, you can't stay in a national or a state park. Again, I don't have all the data on state parks, but my anecdotal data says we can stay in state parks most of the time. Thanks for watching. If you have any other experiences that you want to share with us, please put those in the comments. We hope that you subscribe and keep watching our travel videos on Saturdays.